Well, good evening, freedom lovers. This is Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and it's great to be back with you. Missed you last week. I was at the LPAC convention, the Liberty Political Action Convention, sponsored by the Campaign for Liberty, Ron Paul's group that he inspired 4 years ago when he ran for president. And it was a great time, great conference. Our program director Bart Frazier was there for the Future of Freedom Foundation. He and I were manning the booth. We made lots of new friends and connected with old friends. And I gave a speech to the assembly, which they'll be posting online sometime in the near future. And when we do that, we'll link to it in our FFF daily email update. Which, if you're not subscribing to, the question is why not? I mean, we've been publishing it now for several years. We'd like to think that it's one of the best, if not the best, libertarian commentary pages on the internet. And we put a lot of time in putting that thing together every day. And if you're not subscribing, you should be, because it's absolutely the best libertarian breakfast you can have every day, or lunch whenever you read it, dinner, doesn't matter. And we'll be linking to that to that talk. We also did a great panel. I mean, we had a really large crowd for the panel. It was on the war on terrorism, the Constitution, and civil liberties. And the presenters were Bruce Fine and me, and it was moderated by Jack Hunter. And we had a lot of stimulating discussion. It was really an interesting dynamic doing it with Bruce, because we both have legal backgrounds, and so it was a good time talking about the important principles of civil liberty and how they've been sacrificed in this so-called war on terrorism that's now gone on 10 years now. I mean, when I was a kid, I used to hear about the 30 Years' War, and I thought, how can a war go on in 30 years, Well, now I'm starting to figure it out. I mean, government officials that love power love these kind of wars, any kind of wars: war on poverty, war on illiteracy, war on drugs, war on terrorism, war on illegal aliens, war on communists. It doesn't matter. They love it because they use it as the excuse to gain more power and take away freedom, which of course is what we've seen here, and that's what Bruce and I were talking about. The enemy combatant doctrine, the Patriot Act, the NSA spying, the torture, the assassination. I mean, it just goes on, and it's going on and on. It's indefinite. So those are the kind of things we discussed. We just got notified about another conference that the Young Americans for Liberty are putting on in February, and Bruce and I are going to have a panel there discussing the same types of things. So that was a great conference. It's really actually been a great couple of weeks for me in terms of advancing liberty. Last week I was invited to substitute host for a radio host named Brent Johnson, who has a show called the Global Freedom Report. And he was going on a vacation last week. It's a 2-hour show every day. And so he asked me to substitute host for him. So it was great. I mean, we nothing but talking about freedom the entire week, and I had some great guests. In fact, be looking for a link on the FFF email update to those radio shows, because they're going to be putting them up on their archives, and we'll link to them. But I had some great guests. I had Sheldon Richman on Monday, Jim Bovard on Tuesday. Wednesday, I had Scott Horton and Anthony Gregory. Thursday, I have something else that I'll tell you about in a minute. And then Friday, I had Lawrence Vance and Lou Rockwell. And it was just a great time. I mean, it was like being, in libertarian heaven, or, to have these great guests, and, all of whom are like heroes of mine in the libertarian movement. And just to discuss libertarianism and Austrian economics and Ludwig von Mises, and that was just really fantastic. I think you'll enjoy the tapes when we link to them. I think you'll really enjoy listening to them. The reason I couldn't do the radio show on Thursday night was that the Future of Freedom Foundation is starting a new program where I'm conducting an informal seminar in conjunction with the George Mason University Econ Society. We're co-sponsoring this. And what it is, it's an informal seminar on law and economics. And, I went in there Thursday evening thinking, well, I'm going to have like 2 or 3 people, but it'll be great. It's sort of a one-on-one, times 3. And Well, because it's no credit. It's not part of the administration program. It's just an informal seminar on law and economics, and I'm conducting it sort of like a law school class where we read court opinions dealing with economic issues and we analyze them and discuss both the legal aspects and the economic aspects. But I mean, you know, people have things to do, exams to take, and so forth, tests and papers to do, and so imagine my surprise. I got this whole classroom, containing about 20 people, filled with the 20 people. We organized it in a square with tables arranged in a square, so it was sort of a round table, and it was great. And the whole discussion this semester is going to revolve around the legal tender cases that were decided by the Supreme Court in 1870. Which raised the issue of legal tender laws, the constitutionality of those laws, paper money, the gold standard. So we can discuss the legal concepts as well as the economic monetary concepts. And it was just great. I mean, there was so much discussion back and forth, and so I'm actually looking pretty forward to the next one we do. And we've got the Economic Liberty Lecture Series. We got David Friedman coming up. So we have all kinds of exciting things at the Future of Freedom Foundation advancing liberty. And these are exciting times for libertarians. I mean, let's face it. You got Judge Napolitano, on national television, advocating libertarianism. You've got John Stossel advocating libertarianism, both on national TV and a syndicated column. You got all the think tanks and foundations, and of course, then you've got the Ron Paul campaign, and now Gary Johnson got admitted finally into the presidential debate. So now there's two libertarians in the debates. These are exciting times for libertarians. And of course, they're scared to death. The statists are scared to death. I was watching Judge Napolitano's show, and he held up this headline that said that was announcing the results of the latest poll, and it says, latest poll results: first place Romney, third place Perry, fourth place I forget who the fourth place went. But now, did you notice something was missing from that picture? Yeah, like second place. I mean, it was just so audacious. But it's what I've been telling you. They are scared to death of Ron Paul. They're scared to death of the libertarians. They don't know what to do about this phenomenon. Should we ignore it? Which, of course, that headline did. It's like, don't even mention who's in second place in the poll, and or should they go on the attack? And what's really fantastic is that Ron's getting attacked from both the left and the right. The liberals are attacking him. The conservatives are attacking him, which really means the statists are attacking him. I mean, because as I've said from the very beginning when I started this show, I don't know, 7 or 8 months ago, I don't know, there's not a dime's worth of difference between a conservative and a liberal. I mean, they both come at this from the same statist mindset, the same statist philosophy. They believe in the welfare state. They're committed to the welfare state. You can see this in Romney, where he says, "I'm a proud believer in Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid," and then the warfare state. I mean, they're proud believers in the warfare state. The occupations, the invasions, the multiple bases, hundreds of bases overseas, the assassinations. I mean, the war on terrorism, the Patriot Act, the body groping at the airports. They love it. They love it all, and they're committed to it. Now, sure, there's going to be variations. Some will say, "Oh, well, wait, I want my reform to take place of education," and the other one will say, "No, do my reform or put me in office." You see the Republicans now saying, "If you'll just put us in office, we'll really cut spending." Didn't we hear that once before? Where at that time, after they were given control of the House, they said, "Well, no, the problem is that if we don't control the Senate, if you'll just give us control of the Senate, the House, and the presidency, finally we can slash spending." The American people gave them all three, and what'd they do? They started to pontificate. They started to say, "Hey, we're now in charge now. We don't need to cut anything because we're in charge, and we're going to be in charge forever. And now we can dole out the privileges and the money to all our friends and buddies. And, happy days are here again." And they didn't, of course, dismantle anything. They didn't cut anything. It was just all they do is rail against, federal aid to PBS or to the, public radio and all that junk. Waste, fraud, and abuse, that's another favorite one that they use, but There's not a dime's worth of difference. I mean, you can see it on the debate panel. Um, it's just absolutely amazing how you can just tell there's not a dime's worth of difference between these people. And you know what's really fascinating is how they did you notice all that immigrant bashing? I mean, this is one area where it just shows so clearly that there's not any difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, conservatives and liberals. I mean, Obama's over there raiding private businesses. I mean, you feel like you're in a totalitarian police state sometimes. They're raiding private businesses. Businessmen are doing nothing more than spending their own money, hiring the people that they want to hire, associating with the people that they want to associate. Do you see any liberals speaking out against this and saying, hey, what about freedom of association? No, of course not. Do you see conservatives speaking out and saying, what about private property and free enterprise? No. It's all the immigrant bashing, raid those businesses, bust up families, forcibly deport people so that they're mired in poverty. I mean, don't you love liberals when they say, we love the poor, we love the needy, we love the disadvantaged. Oh, but by the way, we're going to deport these poor people who are struggling to make a living and just want to work back to their home countries where they can get mired in even more poverty and possibly even die of starvation. What do we care? We love the poor, needy, and disadvantaged as long as they're American citizens and they can vote. I mean, it's just disgusting, and you see these Republicans, Santorum and Romney up there, puffing out their chest about how tough they are on immigration. I think it was Santorum that was saying about Perry when he didn't want to build that great big Berlin Wall down there. Oh, you're weak on immigration. Oh, isn't he a Mr. Tough Man? Because he's just tough on immigrants, people that can't defend themselves because of the plight in which they find themselves, the defenseless people. Boy, that takes a lot of courage, to go on the attack against people that are not able to defend themselves. And you know what? You know what's going on here? You see it in every society in which there is economic problems. Instead of taking responsibility for these economic problems, and they're all the people up there except Ron Paul and Gary Johnson are responsible because it's their statism that has brought us our economic problems. The out-of-control spending is a direct result of the programs on which they're spending the money. Okay? I mean, this thing doesn't happen by, some outer space, phenomenon that strikes Earth. It happens because of statism. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, farm subsidies, education grants, grants to your community, aid to dictatorships. Over here on the military side, the gigantic military-industrial complex, much like the military-commercial complex in Egypt, a permanent feature of statism. 1,000 bases around the world, more than 130 countries or so, or 700 to 1,000. We don't even know how many bases. Invasions occupying 2 countries for more than 10 years. This costs a lot of money. A lot of money. And so they tax to do it, but they get concerned about raising taxes too high, so they go out and borrow the money, and they borrow from the Chinese communists, which means the communists are now the premier foreign lender of the United States. And so you got all these problems, and what do these statists say, both on the liberal side and the conservative side? Oh, it's not us who bears the responsibility for this. Oh, no, it's all those illegal aliens that are just coming in and stealing our money and taking our jobs. In other words, don't take personal responsibility, even though you may preach it in all your conservative conferences and so forth. No, don't take personal responsibility for your statism. In other words, blame it on the scapegoat, the person who crosses a border in search of a better life. And I love it when they say, oh, they're coming over here for welfare. Oh, then how come they never bust the welfare agencies? How come there's never raids at the welfare agencies? I mean, if they're flooding the welfare agencies, wouldn't you think that'd be a good place to bust them? No, they bust them in the private companies where they're working. And of course, then next. I mean, this is a classic case of Ludwig von Mises. Says one intervention leads to another intervention, because when I was young, I was growing up on the border. I grew up on a farm that bordered the Rio Grande, and we hired illegal aliens. Everybody hired illegal aliens in Laredo. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people did, and it was a mutually beneficial transaction. When you enter into a trade with somebody, whether it's buying and selling or hiring people, both sides benefit. It's just an axiom. It's subjective value. If they didn't benefit, they wouldn't enter into the transaction. They're giving up something they value less for something they value more, and it wasn't illegal. And I remember these statists back when, because this immigration nonsense goes on year after year after year. I've seen it for, 50, 60 years. This bashing of immigrants in this country by the statists. And I remember when they were going to make it illegal to hire illegal aliens. Now, they'd already made illegal entry, against the law, and, the illegals kept coming. I mean, it's human nature, to cross walls and fences and whatever to try to better your life. And they passed a law against transporting, because they said, oh, well, transporting, if they can't get north, that just finishes everything. Well, of course, the black market formed in that, just like it has in the drug war. And I remember when they were proposing this law, they were saying, oh, this is all we need. Just make it illegal for businessmen to hire illegal aliens, and that'll be the end of it. We promise we won't come back to you with more crises and more interventions. And I knew it was nonsense. I knew it was absolute nonsense. I knew they would be coming back within 4 or 5 years with the new immigration crisis, more interventions, and sure enough, that's what they've done. I mean, they've got the raids on the businesses now. I mean, tremendous violation of business privacy, people minding their own business, producing goods and services with people they want to hire. And now they build this Berlin Wall that Santorum and his ilk, Romney, are so proud of. I mean, it's just not. You notice the liberals never talk about the ecological damage of this thing. No, all they just want to talk about is the same thing the conservatives talk about, that this is the final intervention. Well, weren't they supposed to be building that wall like 4 or 5 years ago? And they're still talking about the illegal alien problem in America. And at least Perry's against the wall. I mean, that speaks well of him. But then he counteracts it by saying, I'm going to put boots on the ground. I'm going to put boots on the ground to keep these people out of here. Give me a break. What boots? The military? That's all we need. Man, I mean, we've already got enough militarization of this society with the national security state and the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the culture of America of assassination and torture and killing and invasions and occupations and militarism. I mean, you get a sense of what it was like to live under the Roman Empire with this junk. And now they want to put troops down there, or Border Patrol. What's the difference? I mean, I grew up around the Border Patrol. I mean, you never found a more abusive group of people than in the Border Patrol. They abuse people on the border. They go onto ranches and farms without warrants. They oftentimes don't even shut the gates behind them, letting cattle get out and livestock. They don't care. They can't be sued. They're immune, and they're arrogant. And they stop people on the highways with no cause. When I lived down there, they stopped me just going to the beach. The Border Patrol just pulls me over. I said, what are you stopping me for? Well, we want to check your trunk. I said, what do you mean check my trunk? You don't have authority to check my trunk. And he says, open the trunk here, or come back with me to headquarters and we'll open it there. What a jerk. I mean, I had to get to the beach, and I went ahead. I wish I hadn't, but I went ahead and opened the trunk, No, he didn't find anything. He didn't find illegal aliens or drugs. I mean, the guy was an idiot. I mean, but this is what people have to put up with on the border. And so when Perry says, oh, we're going to put boots on the border, give me a break, I mean, why can't these statists just take responsibility for the damage they've caused this country with their statism? Why can't they just do that? And then stop looking for the scapegoat. Stop, blaming the immigrants. Stop blaming the rich, the free enterprise, big oil. Stop blaming everybody else Stop blaming the part of the economy that isn't regulated by the government. You know, they say, oh, well, we just got too much freedom and free enterprise in this country, and that's the problem. The problem is the statism. And that's what we libertarians must continue emphasizing to the people of this country and to the people of the world. It's statism. I mean, if you go like to Greece, there's a reason why Greece is mired in the economic and financial problems in which it is mired. Statism, specifically socialism, the welfare state, Social Security, free health care, Medicare, Medicaid, free education, public schooling. They got it all there, the pensions. And this is the dole society. They spent and they spent and they spent and they committed themselves to spending till they, they don't have a, that, I mean, yeah, you could still tax the rich, but the problem is that they're at a point where the more you tax the private sector, the more you destroy the private sector. See, you see, the parasitic part of society needs the private sector to thrive. And so if they destroy the host, the private sector, the parasites know that they're out of life too, because they suck the lifeblood out of the host. So if they keep imposing the taxes on the private sector, they threaten to kill that host. And so what they were doing in Greece, the same thing they were doing here, is just borrowing the money. They were lying. They were keeping it secret. They were hoping nobody would ever find out. But the speculators find out. I mean, this is why they hate speculators. Speculators start shorting the market on Greek bonds and so forth. That sends a signal to people. Or here buying gold, that sends a signal to people that, hey, government's getting ready to inflate. Now they couldn't inflate in Greece because the European Union wouldn't let them. I mean, they're part of the Eurozone, and the Germans, who have at least since World War I have strongly believed in a sound currency, the German mark, which used to be one of the soundest currencies in the world. They don't go down this inflation road. They're not interested in it. They know that this is just a crock. And I don't know if you caught Paul Volcker's, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve's op-ed. I can't recall where it was, but I think it was the Wall Street Journal, where he said, this notion that you can just inflate a little bit, to kind of stimulate the economy is just a crock. That all you do is create malinvestment. The Austrians have been talking about this. Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek, Murray Rothbard been talking about it for decades. That when you inflate a little bit, all you're doing is perverting the signals in the marketplace. Artificially lowering interest rates. Businessmen think, hey, there's enough savings in that society. I can go in there and start, and expanding my business. Go in there and getting a loan. It's a cheap loan. And then when all of a sudden, when everything starts shaking out and the bubble breaks, and it's clear that the savings were not in that society, that it was just an artificial signal, everything starts to crack apart. And that's when, of course, the statists then start blaming free enterprise and blaming the immigrants or the communists or the rich, the greedy, all that, the banksters, all that kind of nonsense. Well, we can see what's happening in Greece, and the only reason I mention Greece is because it's no different. The principle's the same. You see, now what should the Greek people do? Well, hello, it doesn't take a rocket scientist. Just demolish the programs. Admit that the welfare state has been a failure. Dismantle them all. From the pensions to the Social Security, dismantle it, leave everybody free to keep everything they earn, release all the restrictions, separate the economy and the state. All right? And then you just have total free enterprise, but enterprise that's free in the sense that it's free of government control. That was the whole idea of free enterprise. Free of government control. And I mean, there's your answer. I mean, if they can't go that far, well then, how about slashing all these programs 50% across the board? Now, I'm not in favor of that because I look at all these programs like cancer. I mean, if you had a cancerous tumor that the doctor would have removed, would you slash it in half? I don't think so. You tell the doctor, take it all out because it's cancer. It's going to kill you. And that's what they really need to do with these welfare state programs. They need to just excise all of them. here in this country, we've had this, 80-year experiment with socialism, the welfare state, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. I mean, it's proven to be a disaster. It's created this mindset of dependency among people. Social Security is the most anti-family value program that's ever been invented. Um, and it's mandatory. It's totally contrary to the principles of charity, of voluntary charity, of honoring thy mother and father on a voluntary basis. It's a collectivist, mandatory, socialist program that, by the way, originated among the German socialists. And that's what really needs to be dismantled. But why won't it be dismantled? Well, because the people on the dole say no. We're not going to let go of our dole. That's why this country is in deep trouble. I mean, deep, deep trouble. Because, once you started this system, once we started, once our grandparents or great-grandparents started this system where the state can take money from one group of people in order to give it to another group of people, that was the beginning of the end. Because that group of people that are receiving money from the state starts to expand. And then they start demanding more than they're already receiving. I want to keep up with inflation. Give me some more, 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 more. So the private sector, over time can handle it. But gradually, as the parasitic sector gets bigger and bigger and bigger and sucking more and more blood, it's like a giant tick, it's just getting fatter and fatter and fatter, And then finally, the host just starts to teeter. And that's what's happened here. You've got the parasitic sector is so large, and it won't let go. I mean, there's this article I saw in the Wall Street Journal here about, it says, why Greece won't reform. And it says, in these 12 months, they're quoting an economic analyst from Greece. He says, in these 12 months, the Greek government, has not fired even one civil servant. The only thing it is trying to tax the private sector out of existence. So imagine that. They won't even fire one civil servant. Because the people that are on this welfare state dole, either directly or indirectly, will fight to the hilt their, quote, right to stay on the dole. And this goes on everywhere. In Cuba, everybody works for the state, right? I mean, we know that. I mean, they carry the liberal vision to its logical conclusion. Guaranteed jobs for everyone. No more rich. They confiscated everything from the rich, just like Obama wants to do. And they gave everybody a job for the state. Well, everybody's mired in poverty and desperation. They're just like practically starving to death. And so the Castro brothers announced that they were going to lay off like 10% of the workforce, and I'm sure liberals here just were exclaiming against this. Oh, that's the worst thing you can do. I'm sure they would have told the Castro brothers if they'd been asked for advice. They would have said, that's going to throw your country in a deeper recession. You're going to throw more people out of jobs. They're going to be unemployed. They're not going to be able to handle it. You've got to grow your way out of this economy. The same junk that they say here. Well, I don't know whether they laid off those 10%. I think it was like 100,000 people or something, but I haven't heard anything about it. And so, even in that society, or maybe especially in that society where people have lived on this dole for, I don't know, 60, 70 years, they don't want to let go. They can't let go. They're too dependent. Their mindset is one of dependency. And of course, it's the same here. I mean, you talk about, when libertarians talk about dismantling Social Security, I mean, the Social Security seniors just go nuts. Oh, I would never be able to survive. I would never be able to handle this. My gosh, I mean, it's just horrible what they've done to the spirit of self-reliance and can-do among the American people. It's turned us into this dependency. I saw where Santorum was up there in one of these debates saying, well, the thing about we Republicans is we trust the American people, or he said, I trust the American people. And, well, hello? If you trust the American people, then what's your thing on Social Security? I mean, trust means get rid of this junk and trust seniors to be able to handle it. Yeah, some of them will have to work, but hey, that's life, it's not such a bad thing. I see seniors working in stores today, and I see them interacting with young people, and it keeps them young instead of sitting out dark corner of some living room, watching television or something. And for the truly needy, that's what families are all about. That's what family values are all about. If families turn their back on somebody, then that's where the church comes in, and neighbors come in, the community comes in, all on a voluntary basis. That's what's called trusting people. That's what's called trusting freedom, or putting your faith in God and faith in yourself and faith in others. And that's what we've lost with this junk. And you've got Medicare that really has destroyed the greatest free market healthcare system in the world. That's what America was once known for, the best healthcare system in the world. And for the truly needy, doctors were providing assistance to the poor, and hospitals were giving free care because they were making a lot of money from the people that were paying it. And we've lost that. You say that to doctors today, and they say, "Oh my gosh, we could never live without Medicare," because they're dependent on the dole, and they really think that patients would be out dying in the streets and everything. They can't conceive of the possibility that doctors would provide free health care to the poor as part of their just everyday practices. Hospitals would do the same. But that's trusting people. That's trusting the free market. That's what statists can't do. Statists put their faith in the state. They put their faith in coercion and mandates, and of course, only except for them. I mean, they always say, "Well, I would help the poor, but no one else would." Right? I mean, have you not heard that before? Statists say that. I'm a good person, but no one else is. Well, if you counted up the number of people that said that, I'm a good person, but no one else is, you got a couple 100 million right there. So yeah, the thing's cracking apart. We all know this. Now, there's also the flip side. The military warfare state. They're not about to let go of their dole. I mean, we've had this national security state since 1947 with the National Security Act, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, the CIA, and then, of course, later the NSA. And you got this gigantic military-industrial complex. You got bases all across the country that scare communities to death whenever they threaten to close them because they're dependent on that military dole. And you've got how many American companies are dependent on military largesse, from selling soft drinks or meals or clothing or, bars next to bases. And, I mean, you got all this huge amount of the sector of the economy that's dependent on the military and will fight fiercely to keep it going because that's their largesse. That's their income. That's what they've built their budgets around. I mean, can you imagine somebody that is pulling in, I don't know, $20 million to get out there and say, yeah, we ought to dismantle this thing. I mean, that's the real evil of this gigantic military-industrial complex, or one of the evils, and obviously not the evil. I mean, and Eisenhower warned us about this, that this thing is a threat, a danger to our democratic processes, and it's a threat to our economic processes. And well, to give you a sense of the mindset, I recently read an article about the Egyptian military. Now, their situation is comparable to our situation. That is, that the military in Egypt plays a dominant role, the same way that the military here plays a dominant role in the society. And there's a mutuality of interest between the two militaries. They enter into partnerships with each other. They get together. They train each other. The Egyptian military comes over here, and they consult with the Pentagon. And I mean, it's a nice partnership. Well, the CIA too. I mean, if you'll recall, the CIA uses their counterpart in Egypt's torture facilities. Where they entered into a torture partnership where they could turn people over to Egypt so that the CIA, could say, well, we're not torturing anybody, but capitalize on the torture facilities, which, by the way, is funded in large part by U.S. foreign aid, your taxpayer money, and that way the torturers in Egypt would torture people on behalf of the U.S., but no one was supposed to know this. It just looked like, oh, well, the Egyptian military's doing this, or the Egyptian version of the CIA. Well, and of course, it wasn't any news. Gaddafi, they got Gaddafi to do the same thing. In fact, I find it so amusing when they say, oh, well, we are bombing the Libyan people because we want to free them. We want regime change there, you know. Well, but this was the guy that they used to torture people. And one of the funniest part of this whole thing was that when Gaddafi was overthrown, there had to be a rush to get to his files. Well, Human Rights Watch beat the CIA to his files. And it was just recently reported that the secret files that the Human Rights Watch uncovered showed that the CIA had renditioned many more people, or at least some more people, to Gaddafi for torture than had previously been thought. And I think it was like 8 people that the CIA, the U.S. government, had turned over to Gaddafi with a partnership. They had a partnership. Now, we don't know the terms of the partnership. We don't know, who approved it, who negotiated the terms. But, I mean, clearly, it had to be the President of the United States that approved this thing. Isn't it hard to believe that the CIA would do this without presidential approval? But, of course, nobody's going to touch this thing. Nobody's going to have congressional hearings on it to figure out how it was that the U.S. government entered into this torture partnership, because the CIA is involved. And I guarantee you, nobody in the Congress is going to jack with the CIA. And, of course, the president's not going to. Nobody jacks with the CIA. I mean, duh. And so, of course, Gaddafi isn't the only one. It's interesting to see Obama calling for the ouster of Assad in Syria. Well, that was the guy they sent that Canadian citizen to be tortured, where he sat in this tiny cell for 1 year, this innocent man, and being tortured, throughout that 1 year. He was being tortured because the CIA had cut a deal with their version, their counterpart of the CIA in Syria, and to torture this guy, Mahar Arar, and Arar, I don't know how you pronounce it. He was a Canadian citizen. And were there ever any congressional hearings on how that came about? I mean, President Bush was there saying, we don't talk to Syria. We don't talk to Syria. It's a state sponsor of terrorism, But somebody was talking to Syria in the U.S. government, because the CIA cut a deal for them to torture this guy on behalf of the U.S. government. Well, so you've got this mutuality of interest, a common mindset, order and stability. I mean, we often hear that term, order and stability in the Middle East and stuff with these dictators. Well, that's the mindset of the military, too, in Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. military, the local militaries, establishing order and stability, order and stability. And what was interesting about the Egyptian military situation is that now that Mubarak's been ousted, the Egyptian people are talking about forming a new government and a constitution that calls that government into existence. Well, the military establishment, which, like I say, is just as dominant as the military establishment here, came out with a declaration telling the Egyptian people that they needed to know that the military commercial complex. Now, in Egypt, the military plays a dominant role in the sense of commercial enterprises. They own stores and businesses and industries and commercial establishments. The military runs like hotels and things like that, and dominant role in society, and a very privileged role. I mean, they're accustomed to this. They've been doing it for decades. Now, of course, the U.S. military doesn't do that, but with its contracts to furnish all the empire stuff, the nice resorts overseas and the bases and the troops, and they've got huge dominant role in economic affairs in terms of people that supply them the goods and services and so forth. The guy that's done just excellent work on this is Nick Turse, Turse. You can Google his name. I mean, he's got it all documented about the extent to which the private sector in the United States is dependent on the military sector. And so in any event, the Egyptian military made an announcement to the Egyptian people that said, you can form any government you want, no problem, but you need to know that the foundation of this government is going to be us in the military. That is, the military comes first and the government's built on top of the military. The military is the foundation. They said, you're not going to touch us. We have the the role in this society that is permanent. We are here to stay. We've been here for decades. You're not going to touch us. Now, go ahead and build your government on top of that. Well, in a sense, the American government, the American military is no different. I mean, you know, if you saw this with Panetta the other day, where he says, you're not going to cut military, no way. And I mean, even if you talk about cutting the rate of increase, they go ballistic. I mean, can you imagine if all of a sudden we start talking in terms of dismantling the military-industrial complex? I mean, closing the bases overseas, getting rid of all this largesse, closing the bases here in the United States, In other words, restoring a republic to our land, getting rid of the empire, closing the Pentagon. Cold War's over. Get rid of NATO. Get out of it. Dismantle it. Bring the troops home from Korea. Bring them home from Germany. The occupation's over. Hitler's not coming back. In other words, dismantle this. I don't think the military would permit it, or the CIA, because they see themselves as the guardians. They see themselves as the ultimate protectors of what they call national security. And they would not permit the American people to make that what they consider would be a very grave mistake. Even like the military in Egypt won't let it happen. And this is one of the big problems with having allowed this thing to come into existence, because the amount of taxation, the amount of borrowing, the amount of debt that's needed to fund this thing, I mean, I don't need to tell you how enormous it is. So you got two halves of a problem here. You got the warfare state, you got the welfare state, and you got these presidential debate people up there, and Obama too, except for Ron Paul and Gary Johnson, that say, well, oh yeah, we're going to exclaim against spending, and yay for the Tea Party and stuff, but they don't want to dismantle any of the money any of the programs that the money's being spent on. And to a large extent, the Tea Party's guilty of this too. They'll get really mad about out-of-control spending and out-of-control debt. And you say, well, are you ready to start abolishing the Department of Education, Energy, Labor, Agriculture, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, farm subsidies, aid to dictatorships? And they say, oh, no. We're believers in the welfare state. We just want to make it work. We want to fix it. We want to reform it. And then you say, well, are you ready to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan and end these deadly occupations of these countries and close the overseas bases and bring troops home from Korea, 70, 80 years after the Korean War was finished? Oh, no. That's all to keep America safe. So, it's easy to exclaim against spending, but, when you're supporting the programs on which the spending is being spent, duh. I mean, it's like saying, well, I favor lightning, Jacob, but, I'm really opposed to thunder. Man, I want to make a principled stand against thunder. But, boy, don't ask me to go out against lightning, Jacob, because, lightning's necessary, I mean, it's ridiculous. And then they go, they blame it on the immigrants. It's all the immigrants' fault, because they're over here trying to get jobs, and they're stealing jobs from Americans. And, I mean, it's just tragic. I mean, it's sad. I mean, and of course, this is why they're so concerned about the Ron Paul campaign. They see that people are getting interested in libertarianism. Now, I got some programs here in our remaining time. I mean, some newspaper articles I thought I'd discuss with you. Kind of fun, to kind of look at the news sometimes from a libertarian standpoint. Here's an article about this trader for a hedge fund. A guy named Kawiku Aduboli, who suffered for UBS, the big global bank UBS, $2.3 billion in losses. I mean, imagine that. And he had been doing it in secret, so they couldn't catch him. Now, what do the statists always say about Social Security, right? That, oh, there's a trust fund. There's a trust fund. Well, it's just so ridiculous. When Perry called Social Security a monstrous lie, unconstitutional, a Ponzi scheme, I mean, the statists like Romney just went ballistic. Oh, my God. Well, Romney's just, Perry's just saying what conservatives used to say. That's how conservatives used to talk. They used to tell the truth about Social Security. I mean, it hasn't been for several decades since they did that. But, what Perry is saying is nothing new. Of course, it's what we libertarians have been saying for ages. It's really funny to see libertarian positions that are now being embraced by some of these conservatives. I mean, look at Ron Paul. You know, Ron Paul's been talking about the Fed for, you know, how many years now? And now it's so funny to see, you know, Gingrich and the rest of I really think we need to audit the Fed, you know. Now, of course, they won't call for ending the Fed because they believe in central planning. They believe in socialism and so forth. But it is funny. But in any event, you know, I remember reading an LA Times article on Social Security, and they said, well, it's not this is an editorial by the LA Times, and they said, it's not really a Ponzi scheme because there's a trust fund, you see. It's so ridiculous. But guess what the trust fund is? The trust fund is the government putting in IOUs to itself. You see, they went out and spent all the money, which they could do legally because the law was very clear. It never set up any kind of retirement program or trust fund or lockbox or IRA, nothing like that. It was just a straight welfare program. They crafted the law very carefully. That's why, you know, those that say, oh, well, there's a contract, Jacob, there's a contract. There's never been a contract. All somebody have to do is go read the law, hire a lawyer, and tell him to explain the law. Anytime in all his, you know, 50, 60 years of life, he could have done that. But they created this illusion to create the appearance of like, oh, well, don't worry, there's money there for your trust fund. And, well, it's IOUs to yourself. But the LA Times and many statists say, oh, well, see, that means it's okay. It's not a Ponzi scheme. Now, my question is that if Adoboli, who you know, lost $2.3 billion in losses, had opened up a safety deposit box in which he put some IOUs totaling $2.3 billion into the lockbox, you know, into the safety deposit box, and said, I, Mr. Adoboli, owe UBS $2.3 billion, would that then not, you know, get him into trouble? I mean, then he could argue, right, that he's got a trust fund. He's got a fund there. It's fully funded. It's got promissory notes in there that there's no fraud at all. That he really hasn't lost $2.3 billion because the safety deposit box has $2.3 billion in trust funds in there. And, you know, I'd love to see, you know, what the LA Times would say about that one. You know, I mean, hello. Now, here's one that, you know, where the guy's talking. This is an article in the New York Times where they're going back to the New Deal. It's How Do You Say Economic Security by Theodore Marmer and Jerry Mashall, where they're waxing eloquent about, oh, how Roosevelt got us out of the Great Depression and how we just need to you know, subscribe to his philosophy once again, that, oh, this is the way to do it, create jobs and stuff. It's amazing. I mean, these people are in la-la land. This is what I'm talking about how they cannot confront that the problems in this country are a direct consequence of this cancer that came into being primarily under the New Deal, this new socialism, the welfare state. And then, of course, in 47, Roosevelt had already died, but the National Security Act, which brought into existence this gigantic national security state, that's the root of the problem. And so this guy, these two people, they're saying, oh, no. The welfare state has nothing to do with it. It's the part of the society that still hasn't been taken over by the welfare state. We need a new deal for that sector of the economy. Well, you know, this goes back to what I've been saying in previous shows. You know, you have a sickness, an illness. You better hope that you go to a doctor that's got the right diagnosis. Because, you know, what happens if you go to a bad doctor and he gives you a bad diagnosis? Yeah, hello. He gives you a bad medicine, the wrong medicine. I mean, you know, you go and say, doctor, I got a stomach ache, you know, and he says, oh, shoot, that's no problem. That's just indigestion. You know, take this Pepto-Bismol for the next year. Well, if it's a stomach tumor, obviously that Pepto-Bismol is not going to do any good for that stomach tumor, okay? It's just going to keep getting larger and larger and larger. And that's why the diagnosis is so important. And it's the same thing here on the economic problems. You want to buy this kind of nonsense? You know, that the problem is, you know, free enterprise in America and big oil and the banksters and greed and the illegal aliens. Okay, fine. But don't be surprised as things keep getting worse and worse and worse, because the prescription is, oh, well, let's inflate the money. That's what they're telling the Greeks to do right now. The statists are going to, imagine that. U.S. officials who have plunged this nation into darkness economically, well, civil liberties everywhere around it. They're going to Greece and the Euro zone, telling them what they need to do to inflate their currency to get out of this situation. And oh, by the way, the Federal Reserve is printing up the money to go help them out. Now, have you seen any congressional laws permitting that kind of thing? No. This is a dictatorship in its purest form. But who cares about that? I mean, we're letting the government do other dictatorial stuff. Invading countries without the constitutionally required congressional declaration of war, assassinating, torturing. What's a little bit of now printing up the money and sending it overseas without congressional approval? And where's the constitutional authority for that? I mean, we're living in some strange times here. We're living in a country that purports to be a constitutional republic in which the government isn't paying any attention to the constitutional restraints that we the people have imposed on it. Here's an article about a journalist who's detained in China for an article he wrote on sex slaves. And the reason that this guy exposed a great big slave trading ring that was being conducted by a civil servant, a government official. Well, that's a no-no. And so, to expose this sort of thing, because, hey, it's the government. Well, they arrested him, and guess what they accused him of? Revealing state secrets. Now, that's against the law in China. Because China is a totalitarian dictatorship. It's a communist regime. And when they take this guy into custody, there's no jury trial. There's no, right to independent counsel. There's no right to cross-examine witnesses. They just cart him away. Well, guess what? Yes, the U.S. government also has a state secrets doctrine. That if you let's say you get tortured by U.S. officials. They just kidnap you and they take you and torture you the way they do, with other people, Well, they do it to Americans too. I mean, that's what the Jose Padilla case was about. The power, the authority to seize Americans, put them in a military dungeon for the rest of their lives and torture them, which is exactly what they do in China. Okay, it ought to give you a little bit of a hint that something's not right, in both countries. But the state secrets doctrine, if you sue, let's say the American government decides to release you, say, okay, you're innocent after all. Or like this guy Arar, they got sent to the totalitarian dictatorship of Syria for torture. He sues, and guess what the government says? They use the same thing that the Chinese totalitarian dictatorship does. They say, state secrets, Your Honor, state secrets. If we have to defend this lawsuit, we'll have to reveal how we got our torture arrangements together, and those are state secrets, just like the China deal. And so the federal judge, they're more scared of the CIA and the military than maybe even Congress. Man, they start quivering and quaking, and they bang their gavel down real fast and say, oh, state secrets, national security, case dismissed, and he scurries back to his chambers, I mean, it's ridiculous. And you know what? You're going to ask me, well, Jacob, when did Congress pass this state secrets doctrine? They didn't. It was a judicially created doctrine. They copied it from the totalitarian regimes. And the Justice Department many years ago, I think it was like in the 50s, again, national security, because the national security state had come into existence in 47. Totally revolutionized American life. We had never had a vast military establishment like that after a war. We had dismantled the standing army, gone back to a peacetime society. We didn't do that after World War II. And so the 50s come along, and the Justice Department makes the argument before the Supreme Court that, oh, Your Honor, in this case here dealt with some kind of accident that had taken place, like a plane crash or something, and the heirs were suing. And heirs of the pilot, they were suing the government for negligence or something like that. And the government went in there and said, Your Honor, this involves, Your Honors, they were before the Supreme Court, and they said, this involves state secrets. If we have to defend this case, we have to reveal national security secrets. And, of course, back then in the 50s, like, oh, man, the communists are coming to get us, and national security was a bigger thing than it is now, or at least as big a thing. Well, so the case got dismissed. These people weren't allowed to recover any money or even try their lawsuit. They're just thrown out of court summarily. And several decades later, somebody got a Freedom of Information Act request granted, and guess what had happened? It turned out the Justice Department had lied to the Supreme Court and to all the federal courts underneath it. It was all a sham to hide government wrongdoing, and they used the national security state secrets doctrine to prevent anybody from piercing into that. So this doctrine was born in fraud. But do you think the Supreme Court has overruled the doctrine now that they've learned that? Of course not. They're just like these totalitarian regimes, man. The government still does this. And so people that are tortured and abused, including Americans, you bring your lawsuit against the government, and they're immune. I mean, they're as immune as the Chinese officials. You think this guy is going to be able to sue the Chinese officials? They'll throw him right back in jail. And that gives you a hint of how far down this dark road that we've gone in this country. Not just economically with the socialism, and not just in foreign affairs with the imperialism. It's just this totalitarian type of junk. The state secrets doctrine, the national security, the enemy combatant doctrine, the torture, the assassination. I mean, did you ever think when you were growing up that you would be living in this kind of society? All done to keep us safe, safe from the threats that they themselves produce with their policies overseas. I mean, it's a nice little scam. They go out and they poke hornets' nests and they stir up trouble overseas. The retaliation comes. They use that as the excuse to grope children at the airport and everybody else, and the Patriot Act and the spying and the out-of-control spending, and then they stir up more crises, which are then used for more color-coded, scare tactics, and it's all rooted in statism, and in the problems the statists have forced it upon our land. So there's only one solution to this, and I don't want to be a broken record because I know I've said this, time and time again. But there's only one solution, and that's to dismantle the statism, extract the cancer from the body politic. Restore liberty to our land. I mean, libertarianism. That's the solution to this whole thing. Restoring a free market society to our land. People keep everything they earn. They decide what to do with it. Voluntary charity all across the board. A peaceful, non-interventionist republic. No empire anymore, where the American sector is free to interact with people of the world through open borders, free trade, free migrations, tourism, including to Cuba, where they got this idiotic embargo and have for many years. In other words, free trade, free immigration, freedom of enterprise, separation of economy in the state, separation of education in the state, separation of health care in the state, separation of charity in the state. That this is the way we get our country back on the right road. And of course, that means challenging the paradigm of statism, or what I've called in the past the statist box. That we libertarians have broken free of that box. And that's the beauty of libertarianism, is that we're not trapped in this box of trying to fix and reform statism, or the welfare state and the warfare state. We're committed to dismantling this in order to restore freedom and prosperity and a normal way of life. I mean, wouldn't you like to just have a normal way of life where you don't worry about, there's going to be terrorists on the airplanes or terrorists on the streets, and you don't have to worry about the government inflating your money out of existence because you got sound money. I mean, that's the kind of society that I think all of us want. And that's where libertarianism comes in. So that's the show for this week. Nice to be back with you, and look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, come and see us at the Future of Freedom Foundation, fff.org. Subscribe to our FFF email update. Tell your friends about us, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much for listening in. Bye-bye.